I know that some of the questions that parents have after their child is diagnosed are, should I tell my child they're autistic? When should I tell them they're autistic? And how do I tell them they're autistic? I had someone comment saying that their 8-year-old had just been diagnosed and that she didn't know how to tell them. What we as autistics may not realize is that it can be tough for neurotypical to know how to explain autism to their child. They've never experienced what it's like to be autistic, so they may not know the right words to say. To us, it may seem simple since it's been our reality all of our lives. But for someone who's never experienced autism, it makes sense that they wouldn't know how to explain it, especially in terms simple enough for a young child to understand. Think of it this way: if you're not blind, could you explain what it's like to experience blindness? For someone who's blind, it would be easy. But for those of us who aren't, it's a lot more difficult. To answer the question, should I tell my child they're autistic? The short answer is yes. The long answer is yes. But in all seriousness, some parents may hide their child's diagnosis in fear of them being othered. What they don't understand is that the child is going to be othered. It's not the autism diagnosis that causes others to look at us weird. It's our autism. Hiding a diagnosis isn't going to make autistic behaviors disappear. The only thing that will change is that your child won't know why all of this is happening. They won't understand why people think they're weird. They won't know why they behave the way they do. Not having that answer doesn't make things better. It makes them worse. It makes them more confusing and scarier. Not having a diagnosis until I was 17 didn't make me any less autistic. All it did was make me feel like an alien. It made me feel like there was something wrong with me. Unfortunately, when I was diagnosed, I wasn't given a lot of information, and I couldn't find much information online. This was in 2003, so resources were still pretty lacking. I had been misdiagnosed as bipolar when I was 13. Um, so meltdowns and shutdowns were always just chalked up to my being bipolar. It wasn't until I realized that I wasn't bipolar a few years back that I went hardcore into researching autism, and there was so much more out there. I was finally able to understand myself. It was such an eye opening event and an incredible weight off my shoulders. Trust me when I say you do not want to put your child through that. Hiding their diagnosis from them does a lot more harm than good. As for when you should tell your child, there's no clear cut time. It's not like you go, all right, Timmy, you're 7 now. It's time to tell you about your autism. If you're worried that your child's too young to understand, I suggest that you still tell them. Plant the seed. They may not understand now, but they will eventually. Let them know, even if they don't think they'll get it. Kids are smarter than you think. You shouldn't wait to tell them simply because you don't think they'll understand. Also, the sooner they know, the more likely it is that they'll accept it. There are people who find out they're autistic later in life and absolutely refuse to accept it. They angrily lash out at the prospect that they may be different. And when you're a teenager Being different can be seen as the worst possible thing. Now, for what some parents find as the hardest part, how to tell your child. When first approaching the topic, it does really depend on your child's age. I'd say if they're 4 or older, you can explain it like this way: that their brain works differently from other people. It doesn't make them weird or bad or broken, just different. And that's awesome. They may see or hear or taste or feel or smell things differently from others. From there, it really depends on the child themselves. You can use simple metaphors to explain certain aspects of autism. If they're non speaking, maybe you explain it like there's a roadblock blocking the path between the mouth and the brain. The words are there, but they just aren't making it from the brain to the mouth. Perhaps explaining hyperfixations, like their brain being glued onto the subject of their hyperfixation, and now they're stuck. You love dinosaurs? Oh, your brain must be glued to dinosaurs. You can explain troubles with regulating emotions, like their emotions are just too big for their little body. When it comes to social difficulties, you can explain it like visiting another country and not understanding the language or culture. There are also some kids' shows that have approached the topic. I know Arthur did. There's also Julia from Sesame Street, her connection to autism speaks aside. I'm sure there are also children's books as well. I can't really give any recommendations right now since it's not something I've looked into, but I'm sure Google can help out. Um, well, there's a lot of information out there for parents. Some could see it as too much information. People aren't automatically going to know what's good for their child and what isn't. There are plenty of parents who are told that ABA is a wonderful therapy and that curing autism is the best route to take. When you're not part of the autistic community, it can be really difficult to know what's good advice and what's bad advice. These parents are just looking for answers, and they end up buried in an unending pile of contradicting information. Do this. No, do that. No, do this other thing. It's enough to make the head spin. Most parents just want to do what's best for their child. Of course, that isn't always the case. There are abusive parents out there, but I'd say the majority of parents are decent people. They don't go to Autism Speaks or Autism Mom Facebook groups because they don't love their child or actively want to harm them. They're just confused and not sure who to turn to. I'm hoping that the autistic community becomes louder and louder so that more parents come to us for help and advice.